Good afternoon. This is a second video from a series of lectures that are about and meant for subgroups of African Americans in the United States. It is a courtesy of mine and also an outcome of multidisciplinary training at the University of Texas that included other specialties and other experts of diverse races, as well as meritorical preparation in diversity training by Dr. Selzer, as well as in language by Dr. Townsend. That is about slang. Slang that is here in those videos explained in its purpose as well as in its drawbacks. It is in no way to discourage or encourage use of such as a skill, but explain that other language skills, broadened ones, can become useful in empowerment of a community, African American community, and in non-assumption of role of an inferior based on power derived from verbal abuse and being overwhelmed by majority of persons who assume cultural superiority. Slang, again, historically, how we determine it. If we take a word and that word function in at least one context to express in anger, hatred, or harm, which sometimes is the same, sometimes it concerns others, is something that is given emotional tint to become proud and becomes a shield against future offenses when those offenses were not warranted or perpetuated for such a long time, while others do much worse grave crimes, that person would otherwise die or become psychologically broken if that continued. And so that is the bigger picture, historically time was, bigger picture when it comes to other tools is to differentiate then slang from language such as curse. Let's say let's stick to dick sucker. That's a curse. To say so in anger, it means that the person is someone who has, as an etiology of that word, a role inferior to being a leader or a father of the family and obtains goods by complacency from another man that is superior, as opposed to dignity that is extrapolated to others, and such is done to benefit a nuclear or extended family and not for greater good. When it is done for greater good, that becomes again having emotional hint of being a compliment. A person becomes someone who is able to, at expense of own sense of self-esteem or risk to be demeaned, endure abuse to obtain well-being at expense of nobody else, well-being of nobody else. And so that becomes someone who is tough and someone who is brave and someone who is actually able to obtain something for others from a person who is sexual, which is in slang called dick slinger. Sexual meaning obtains something for wife in the first place based on primal loyalty, and then for others, which is much more selfish, but obtains such in a sexual, paradoxically way, despite the term having sexual connotation, to have that provided to self and others in fair, based on work way. And so these words, as you can see, function depending on the context, and when there is meeting or talk between persons that are friends or in a given group, there are other groups who express themselves. If offense has at least one demeaning, meaning in that context it promotes harm or anger, or being accused and in trouble with authorities, for instance, or own wife or children or husband. The connotation of vocabulary that is called plain or mainstream has no negative or pejorative meaning. So that depends on language. But for instance, in English, chivalry, being chivalrous, means being able to provide courtesy to others that is pertinent to men. Being chivalrous means being polite and being, in many ways, generous to others in niceness that is dignified. And see, there is no pejorative or negative connotation. There is no curse that say you chivalrous someone, as opposed to you motherfucker, which there is. You see, and that is the difference, that plain language marks then a person who speaks a slang as a person who is in many ways vulnerable to emotional shift when accusations, even false one, occur, and also vulnerable when that is used to speak to a person who does not know all those connotations and can perceive, depending on the context, being ridiculed or being demeaned, as well as being threatened. And that creates a lack of harmony and communication, and more above all, in self-esteem, own self-esteem. When true self describes self to others, it is good that the language is depicted to the best of one's knowledge in language that depicts goodness, in inherent goodness of a human, as well as in actions. Meaning the word has no, like chivalry, no negative connotation. So a person can say, I am a chivalrous man who always behaves in honorable ways. As opposed to saying, for instance, I am a major dick swinger that actually always makes sure that women feel cool. That is to say, I am a family in good connotation, similar to chivalry. I am a family man or an adult who achieved full maturity socially, that makes others in a sexual way, because that's the term cool, feel an equivalent of chivalrous, so feel good in my company and recognize me as honorable man. And you see, it can be reduced then to, I am a person who only is if sexually active and obtains money and all goods for significant other, counting on such and conning women to obtain such. And I treat all women, instead of underlying their maturity, social one, or also maturity to form marriages, as if they were children or males. Also, another expression is to call women guys. A woman is a woman, it's not a man, and guy denominates a person who is a male. And that has pleasant connotation, forming that equality. But see, art of language, so that there is no need for emancipation based historically on past harassment, softened, or that became verbal kung fu, is to have own for self language that has no chance of distortion in most or all context. And so then that speech from I am chivalrous to all ladies, as opposed to I am a dick swinger who makes sure that all women feel cool, becomes one, impossible to distort to become negative. When true to reality, a person is like a bulletproof vest, meaning a person cannot be granted based on strength, based on gloating from harm done in the past, a dignity. That person has dignity and knows about it expressing self, as opposed to second one, when persons can accuse of sexual intentionality in present, in eternity perpetuate past discrimination or past failed relationships, and to reduce efficiency of group in emancipation or obtention of funds, or make for instance, despite having the same role or superior role regardless of the language, make granting of prizes non-dignified, because prize is given by a perpetrator who assumed the role of a superior by sheer abuse, and then granted for further abuse in compensation, which is untrue when persons speak that way. That indicates complacency. And so that's why plain language, apart from verbal kung fu when appropriate, when is verbal kung fu appropriate? Of course, an African American person often is much more skilled than a person who is from a different culture. However, I have own culture in which I can and I am skilled in verbal kung fu, and I am able also to mark how person speaks by ego shift, by mimicking that person's verbal abuse to reduce in that person a perception of superiority. It is done in Polish, of course, and I can do so in slang as well, African American as well. However, it is a reduction of level of the conversation on level of groups to aspiring to harmonious relationship in which the granting of prizes or recognitions or funds is based on achievements and actual superiority, and not impeded because posts are fake and persons lack self-esteem or feel guilty because granting is based on past abuse when the other ones have achievement, intending to demean those promoting slang as good. Slang is good, but it has, like denominated verbal kung fu, or psychological adaptation to harsh environment, limited purposefulness, and is one of the tools to use. Thank you.